Good morning, I'm Mark Settle, and I'm actually thrilled to be joined today by Beth Cappello. Beth and I have known each other for a long time, but I have to admit that my relationship maintenance skills could use a little buffing up because I haven't seen Beth or talked to her in a while. And she's become a very busy person as the deputy leader of the IT organization within the Department of Homeland Security. So Beth, welcome, and thanks for spending some time. And I thought maybe we could kick off and talk a little bit about the Department of Homeland Security. I suspect many people kind of associate that solely with the TSA service that they encounter when they travel in an airport, and they may not really understand like the full breadth of responsibilities that DHS has. And then maybe more specifically, like what's the IT organization there? Is it big, is it small one? But what's your job?
Mark, it is such an absolute pleasure to be here and to see you. Yeah, we've been a little busy, and I think since the last time we actually spoke in person, I've changed jobs a couple of times, and I landed at the department headquarters CIO office about a year and a half ago. So when we look at DHS, we're, I think, a really interesting organization, period. And then we are particularly interesting from an IT and technology perspective. So the Department of Homeland Security was created, as most folks are aware, after the events of 9/11, and it brought together a number of organizations that had existed in other parts of the federal government. And right now, DHS is the third largest civilian federal agency. And we have a wide variety of mission sets, from facilitating trade and travel, to securing the border, to responding to national emergencies, and hardening our cyber infrastructure against cyber attacks. So when you look at DHS, we've got approximately 240,000 federal employees, and those are everything from law enforcement officers, as you mentioned, at TSA or at Customs and Border Protection, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to the folks at FEMA that respond directly to national emergencies such as hurricanes and natural disasters, to the folks that work at CISA. And they're the folks out there hardening our civilian federal networks and ensuring that our environments are secure. So when you look at the IT construct in DHS, we're even more interesting because we brought together a number of disparate organizations and disparate mission sets. And some of those are extremely operational and very much at the edge. And so they have a commensurate IT organization supporting that mission set. But from an overall enterprise view, we have the Office of the DHS CIO. And that position is currently occupied by Eric Heisen, and I am his deputy. And we oversee and manage an enterprise IT portfolio of just north of $7 billion. And that includes the IT spend in those specific components. And we have an opportunity and an obligation to ensure that we are stewards of the taxpayer dollars, but also that these components are allowed to facilitate and support their direct mission requirements.
So, one of the topics I wanted to explore with you was, as I perceive it, you mentioned the component agencies, and you face a problem that's very similar to a large American corporation that has different lines of business. And so if you're the global CIO, you're trying to always find ways to sort of cross-pollinate IT knowledge. And so if one line of business has developed some deep expertise in predictive analytics, maybe somebody else has chased blockchain, maybe somebody else is really, kind of cutting edge around information security, rather than have each one of those lines of business kind of reinvent the wheel and have to redevelop that expertise. And this is more of an art than a science. People have to figure out a way to try to move some of that experience around to avoid duplication of effort. So what ways have you gone about doing that there at DHS?
So that's a really interesting topic for exploration in an agency as young as DHS, right? You look at DoD, that's been around forever, and their scope and size and scale. Obviously they're larger than DHS, but it's sort of akin to us in scale. But they've had 50, 60, 70, I don't know, a bunch of years to figure out how you share best practices across the organization. I think at DHS, we have come together quite well, frankly, for such a young agency, but we use a number of governance structures, which I'm sure everybody in the technology field, those are our favorite. So we have the CIO Council, we have the Deputy CIO Council, we have a Joint Requirements Council, we have a CISO Council. And I know that sounds like a lot of meetings, and I guess in some ways it is, but those are great opportunities to come together and talk about best practices and knowledge sharing and mechanisms for facilitating communication. I think some of the most important aspects of that, or the most important aspect, frankly, is trust. And so within the CIO community, within the IT community, you have the DHS CIO, who is a political appointee. So that changes with administration. And for anybody that's followed DHS, we've had a number of CIOs at the top of the chain. But the community itself, I think there are an awful lot of people in the IT community in DHS who are here for the mission. And so that trust between folks within the organization is really what helps drive that facilitation and collaboration.
Along those lines, I'm just going to interrupt and say, one of the procedures that I've seen work very well is if you can move people around from like one line of business or agency to the other, some of the myopia they have, which is, well-intended myopia, but, they understand the benefits of some of this kind of cross-pollination for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually an example of that. I think that one of the reasons I'm at DHS headquarters is because I do have experience in multiple components, right? I worked at CBP for a number of years, including the legacy US Customs Service, and also spent time at Immigration and Customs Enforcement 2 different times. And I had the pleasure and privilege of actually working out in the field at that edge piece of the technology support. So I think that helps bring a different perspective up to the headquarters level. And in fact, a number of the folks that are on my direct team have come from within the components. And we see a lot of movement between the components, where it does allow for that cross-pollination. And again, it allows for the trust. I know you, I know where you're coming from, I know you're dedicated to the mission. And one of the things that we really try to tamp down is the not invented here thing, which is a real phenomenon. And in the IT community, it's great to be out in front, right? I did that. It was my team. It was our work. But what we like to do is celebrate, DHS as a whole, and specifically the IT community as a whole community, not just within the individual components. I think we're a work in progress, but I am really proud of the work we've done, specifically here in the last year, to be honest.
So I have a perfect question for you. Another phenomenon of large companies, or really any large organization, is creeping bureaucracy. And as a former CIO, operating CIO, I've launched bureaucracy busting campaigns. Like we would solicit ideas. Like anybody could come forward if they think that there's a committee that's no longer effective, or meetings are taking place, that don't need to take place. Like anything we can do to give you, the staff members, time back, because from your perspective, management has dreamt up all of these processes and procedures that we're inflicting on you, type of thing. So with no disrespect intended, you have a very large organization, and it is the government. And the minute government and bureaucracy are sort of like two interchangeable concepts in many people's mind. So how do you go about bureaucracy busting there so it can stay human, within an organization of 240,000 people?
I absolutely love that question. And if I'm going to be completely honest, it's not been with intent, right? So I love your idea of a specific focused effort to bust up the bureaucracy. Of course, in the government, we'll never do that. That's probably a bridge too far. But what I do think happens is transformation efforts, right? And technology transformation is actually a forcing factor. So I'll give you an example of that. One of the best bureaucracies in the federal government is acquisition and procurement, right? It's just one of everybody's favorites. It is, I think, specifically for DHS, we've modeled a lot of our practices on DoD, which is an absolute behemoth when it comes to to the acquisition space. And it's very disciplined, but it is very bureaucratic. As we in the IT community look to adopt agile best practices, right, and agile methodologies and sec DevOps, that is really, that whole approach, that whole mentality is rather at odds with longstanding acquisition and procurement practices. One thing I'm just absolutely thrilled with, again, at DHS, we have to operate at the speed of mission. We don't have a choice in that matter, right? There, on any given day, it could be a natural disaster or a cyber crisis. You know, it's all of it. So we have to be very agile and responsive. And so I really appreciate the partnership with our acquisition community and our procurement community to take a look at how we're trying to move technology forward, right? How we're trying to do transformation and really be a partner with us and looking at some of that bureaucracy and some of those long-standing approaches to the acquisition lifecycle and say, okay, this makes sense for an agile environment, but this doesn't. And so we're not going to make you do that form or documentation or jump through those hoops. I think, though, to the point of the question is, we probably could do better with intent, right? And sort of focusing some activities on bureaucracy busting. I'm going to steal that phrase because I really like it. But I do think, again, like with cybersecurity is another example where I think for a long time in the government, we focused on, excuse me, compliance, right? And that was, we have all of this guidance and all of these policies and these rules around cybersecurity compliance. But what as we've matured and as we've transformed, I think we've identified that risk management is a much better way to look at the whole, and it's more efficient and more effective. So for example, we go from what was a 3-year authority to operate an ATO, fixed in time. We do the work, it's a pile of documentation, and then we leave it alone for 3 years. In recognizing how that might impact your risk, right? We have shifted that bureaucracy to an ongoing authorization. Now that's very tactical. That's sort of at a micro level. But I do think that we've had a number of opportunities where technology is the forcing factor to relook at the business processes and to look at the bureaucracy that we've put on top of things. And after having just talked to you about the number of governance councils we have, I might have an opportunity there for some more bureaucracy busting. Yep.
And one of the areas that I focused on in the past is project management. It kind of goes along with your DevOps comments. But if you're not careful, some of the most elaborate project management processes are built for the biggest and riskiest projects. And somehow that formalism has almost like an osmotic way of like finding itself on the doorstep of a little 3-month project that involves 2 people, and suddenly, you know, they're jumping through hoops. So, you know, so they should never have to jump through. Okay, in the interest of time, last question.
Okay.
So as we got ready to have this conversation, I was thinking about the workplace management practices that you had to put in place when the pandemic hit a year ago. And I don't want to rehash a lot of this. I think it's more interesting to think about how we're all getting ready to come out of this and kind of go back to some kind of a new work style. But in your case, in particular, as you mentioned, you have people in the field like the TSA screeners. They're going to physically have to come into work. I presume you have some people in these information security facilities. They need to be physically there where like the equipment is. You can't, you know, create some of those super Star Wars looking like screen rooms and stuff like that in your home, no matter how many monitors that you have. So you had, you know, I'm sure that the component agencies exercised common sense and kind of had to figure out who has to go where and all that. And any tips that you might have about how to think about bringing people back, or the criteria where you start bringing people back? I mean, I don't know if you've tried to enforce any uniformity across some of the components, so there's not a sense of inequity in what people are being asked to do.
So I am very pleased to report that DHS has instituted a policy of maximum flexibility, recognizing that we do have a disparate workforce, right? As you pointed out, some folks simply have to come into a physical location. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But by minimizing that population, or really ensuring that that's a necessity, and then offering flexibility, location flexibility for the rest of the workforce, has really, I think, allowed us to focus on the protections that are necessary for the frontline workers.
Yep.
We've just announced our Vaccinate Our Workforce program right now, and we, as most vaccination programs have done, we've separated our workforce. These are our frontline folks. These are who would be next in line, and then tracking employees who have gone and gotten vaccinated outside of the DHS program. So I think when DHS specifically looks at something like a response to a pandemic, and as I mentioned, we're the Department of Homeland Security. Crises are sort of what we do. This is just one in kind of a long line of crises that we respond to. And so while this one is very different in the way that we did our continuity of operations, right? Typically, if say DC were under attack, we would go someplace else physical and we would all get together and do the work. In this instance, that wasn't possible. And we had to be prepared for that. We had to be able to work from anywhere. And I think that we did a very nice job of common sense approach to managing the workforce and being very flexible in what the workforce needs. I mean, we could spend probably hours talking about the challenges with parents at home with children having to go to school from home and trying to balance work, and what that entails from a management perspective. But circling back to how we're going to come back to work, I think that we are going to continue with the maximum flexibility approach and what makes sense. I am in all of my years of being with this organization, I have come to learn one thing. One ring to rule them all is just not the right approach, and that being flexible and being mindful of what serves the mission and serves the people is, and by people I mean our workforce, is what is going to get it done correctly.
One thing I'm convinced is nobody really can predict human behavior, and so if we sit here today and say the surveys that get published, American opinion is very fickle. Come back in 3 months and everybody will say, I'm dying to go back into an office setting, or, there's no way to really predict what's going to happen. I am going to let you go. I am going to make an offer, however, before we depart. I do a fair amount of publishing these days. And if you want to collaborate on an article about how I use DevOps to bust bureaucracy in the federal government, I think that's a catchy, award-winning opportunity there. So if you have the time and the permission, we might have a real opportunity to spend more time together in the future. Okay, with that, I'm going to let you go. I know you're really busy. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
This was absolutely a pleasure, Mark. It's so good to see you. Thank you.
Okay, great to see you. Take care. Bye.